Well, that was an experiment. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek Deep Thoughts Thin Coats with me, Phil the Glacial Geek. Today, I am going to be working on continuing painting my guy here. As you can see from the last Deep Thoughts, remember I talked to you about prepping the black armor. You can kind of see how it's coming out here, which is pretty cool. It's got dimension. It's got it still looks black, and what's going to happen is from here on out, I'm just going to be blocking in the other colors. So today I'm probably going to be working on some silver, and then I'll douse the whole thing in the dark tone again to give it another wash and bring it down. And I think it'll look great. I'm pretty excited how it's coming out so far. I love this use for black armor. It always looks good, and it's not as insanely mind-numbing as trying to do edge highlighting on black with the Dawnstone. It just would kill me every time. So I'm glad I've come up with this process here. So today I'm actually going to be doing it in the silver. So I'm going to be using the Army Painter's plate mail to do some of that. And that's what I'm going to be working on this. I'm also going to be talking about the topic du jour that everyone is interested in, which is the new FAQ that dropped and all of the Army FAQs and Erratas that dropped this week, changing up how the game is going to be played. So it finally came out. I know they had promised in April, it was early on, and now it's finally coming out. So it's pretty exciting about that. But the one thing I do want to talk about is about this weekend. So this weekend I was at Barnyard Brawl, and I tried streaming the videos of my games that went on. I know some of you saw it, and I know some of you also unsubscribed because of problems I was having with the stream. Unfortunately, the network was dropping my stream, and each time it would drop the stream, YouTube would create another video, and that spammed out a whole bunch of like 6-minute clips of the live stream. And I know it clogged up a lot of streams for people, and I apologize for that. So it was an experiment, and it obviously did not go off well, because I think I had a whole lot of you guys unsubscribe from my YouTube channel. So hopefully I can win you guys back, and I'll have you back into the fold, and we can all work together to keep it going forward. But I apologize for that, and hopefully in the future it'll work out a little bit better, and I can figure it all out. So with that out of the way, this last weekend I did have a tournament at Barnyard Brawl. I went 3-2, which was super exciting with my Gene Stealer Cult. It was the same list that I took to Warzone Gigabytes. So I ended up with a better record than I did there, and I was very excited about how everything turned out. Everything that I played and brought did what I wanted it to, and I ran into some pretty hard counters, and they performed pretty admirably for that. So for instance, one of the rounds I played up against 6 Eldar Flyers and still managed to get off the victory with that, which was incredible because, I mean, it's a hard counter to what my army can do. My army really does the best when it can come up and punch things in the face. And I couldn't punch the Flyers in the face. So I ended up realizing that and deciding that the best way for me to do well in the mission, doing ITC missions, was to find a way to tip the odds in my favor. So in ITC, as many people know, there's a couple different ways that you can that you score points. So one of them is killing things, and if I wasn't going to be able to kill his things as well, then the other way was holding objectives and scoring points that way. So with that in mind, I decided that, well, if I can't beat him at his game, I'm going to do what I can in my game. So I knew he had a lot of units that were very that he didn't have a whole lot of units on the ground, and I knew that Flyers can't hold objectives. So what I did was, starting in turn 1, I just kind of try to hope for the best and hide, and he did a whole lot of damage with his Flyers, getting right across the board and putting a big dent into the things that I had on the ground as it was. And then I realized turn 2, I came in really hard and decided to punch everything he had on the ground in the face. So I killed his Wave Serpent. I killed a bunch of things that made the charges off on the things that were inside of the Wave Serpent. I really put the pressure to him really early on with that, and made sure that I could, try to get as much of an advantage as I possibly could, based upon the fact that I knew that I wasn't going to be able to beat him in just killing. I had to make sure that I held objectives. So starting in turn 2, I basically controlled the ground. He had a few units left. I was able to charge into his what is it? The Avatar of Cain, and really take him on and kill him. Killed him once, and then he brought him back with the stratagem, and I killed him again on his turn, and really put a knock in his units on the ground at that point. And I knew from then that I could hold more. I was holding more, and I was getting the bonus because I was holding the objective in his zone since I dropped down and was able to get there, which was super effective at really knocking out his ability to keep up with points. And I managed to get the victory because I played to the objectives that I could and just focused on that. So I didn't actually end up getting boots on the ground, knocking him off the units, killing all his ground units until turn 6, because he dropped in he had a couple units that he held in Deep Strike Reserve for exactly that fear of getting knocked off the board early on. And he was able to keep them away and use his flyers to move block me, which would be less of an issue after this FAQ, which we'll get to, from getting in and killing all his guys earlier on. But I managed to keep him on the run, keep him off of the objectives, so that he wasn't getting any hold objectives. I was getting both hold objectives and hold more, and the bonus from the ITC because of what I was able to hold. And it just left me in a position where I had enough of a lead that even though he was killing a lot of my things, because I was holding that kind of position, I was able to get out the victory, which was super exciting for me to be able to do. I was also able to beat a Death Guard list first round. I beat a Space Wolf list with Wolfen round 3. That was a tough one because the Wolfen, they chew through everything that they look at, and they're super durable and super effective at not dying themselves, which is, super key to being a very good close combat unit, is not dying quickly and being able to punch things in the face super effectively. So I realized that was what was going on early, and I realized that he was just going to chew through anything that I left within range of him. But at the same time, there are other ways to score points, and if I really wanted to do well in the mission, I wasn't going to be able to just beat him out in a hand-to-hand combat with his Wolfen. So what I did was I dropped my other units out and around far away from it, but I left enough juicy units that I was willing to sacrifice to the Wolfen in order to keep them from really getting at the other units that were getting me points. So I used my other units to clear off his objective. I used them to go clear off a lot of his fire base, but I left like a Patriarch, I left like a 20-man Acolyte squad in the way of his Wolfen, and they sure enough did their job and chewed through my guys, which was super scary. It's a lot of times you go into these situations and you go, all right, well, it's do or die time. I knew if I tried to play cagey too much that he would just take over the board and I wouldn't be able to fight back. And I also knew that in a straight up hand-to-hand, straight up face-to-face fight, that his Wolfen were going to probably eat my aberrants alive. So what I'm left with at that point is an understanding of, all right, well then what do I do to try to counter that? And it meant taking the risk of feeding the Wolfen a whole bunch of units that they could eat, but still maintaining board control and maintaining control of other areas and getting my kills elsewhere to try to get the victory, which is what I did, and it worked well. I got the victory. It was a hard-fought, awesome game, and all my games were really fun. So the first day, I went 3-0 against those 3 lists and had a really good time. Day 2, I ran into some really strong lists. This would be expected at a big GT like this, and especially after going 3-0, you're going to run into some really strong lists. So on 3-0 on the first game that I played against on day 2 was a 3-Knight Crusader list, or a 3-Knight list. So it had 2 Knight Crusaders and a 2 Knight Crusaders and a Gallant, and I faced off again. And he had a bunch of guard. He also had 2 tank commanders with Punisher cannons, and it was a super hard counter to my list. And I knew that if I wanted to have any chance of holding in on this victory, I needed things to go my way in certain positions, and I had to be relatively aggressive in trying to keep him from progressing up the board. And I also had to be pretty aggressive at making sure that his things couldn't just dominate the field. And I only somewhat succeeded. So the things that needed to go well for me didn't. I wasn't able to mentally onslaught his knight very well. I wasn't able to get certain charges off as I needed them. And at the end of the day, those shortcomings really added up and meant that I just wasn't able to get the victory. And he beat me super hard. It was quite the shellacking that he put on me. So at that point we were in brackets. So the way that Barnyard Brawl works is that they break you into brackets after round 2. So I was in the second bracket because I was undefeated at that point, and that's when I ran into that on turn 4, round 4, and he really just put the beating on me, and made sure that I remembered the army. That was actually against a guy with Dark Bunny Creatives. Super beautiful army. It was these knights, these Death Corps of Krieg themed knights that were super beautiful on these awesome decorative bases. Super cool. Check them out. They're on Facebook. You can check them out, and on Instagram. Dark Bunny Creatives. And that's a really beautiful work there. So it was nice to see a nice army. The guy was nice enough, and it just, he just beat me pretty hard. So then the last game of the tournament, I went up against Tony Pierce, and he had Gene Stealer Cult. So it was Gene Stealer Cult and Gene Stealer Cult. And we went into face off against each other, and we've been talking, and we actually, we had dinner the night before, talk about how excited we were that both of us were 3-0 with Gene Stealer Cult going into day 2, and then we both lost our first game of day two, and ended up facing off against each other. And he's a super awesome, cool guy, and we had a really great time playing. The big mistake I made was I thought about the Gene Stealer Cult from my perspective and not from his perspective, and didn't take into account his list. My list is very selective in what it does. It's very selective in how it drops and where it drops and what it goes after and how it goes after it. His list is very much designed around board control, like super board control. He had a whole bunch of Brood Brothers. He had 3 20-man squads of Acolytes versus my 120-man squad of Acolytes, and he had a whole bunch of just bodies everywhere that he was flinging on the board. And I, thinking about Gene Stealer Cult my way, which was that I figured we would just get in there and it would be punch, counter punch, and that whoever could make that last punch was going to be the victor. And if I was playing myself, that's exactly what would have done well. So I thought, all right, I'm going to let him go first, because that way I can respond to his punch with a counter punch to hopefully get me the victory. But the problem was, he went first and then dropped down on the table and just took up every bit of real estate that he possibly could, which is exactly what he should have done. This is exactly how he does well with his list, is taking up board control and just controlling it. And what it did was it made it very difficult for me to get out where I needed to be and put myself in a position to be able to make the counterpunch. So he really narrowed me into a certain corner, and I tried to fight my way back out of that corner, and it just became an uphill battle that I just wasn't able to pull off. But I had a great time, had a lot of fun, learned a lot of things, and going forward, I feel really strong about the Gene Stealer Cult, especially the list that I've got going now. I'm trying to see what I can do to tweak it to make it better and address some of the issues that I had. But honestly, it performed very, very well, and I was very excited about how it went. I was proud of how I played them in all of my games. So, we can always keep learning, and the second you stop learning is the second that everyone else surpasses you. So I'm just going to keep learning from it and going forward, and I think the Gene Stealer Cult really are in a strong place for what I'm going to go into. So, which takes us to the major topic of this conversation, which is the new FAQ that dropped. And there were some changes that affected Gene Stealer Cult in the new FAQ. Some of them affected me more than others. And there's also a lot of aspects that happened that are going to affect the competitive scene, that are going to affect just the fun scene. They're just going to affect the game in general. My basic first general response to the FAQ was I was very happy with it. I think that there weren't any knee-jerk reactions. I don't think that there was any overbearing changes. I think that the changes that they made were well reasoned, and that the changes that they made are good for the game. There's a lot of different things that happened. They managed to address, in my opinion, the undercosting of the Knight Castellan. They went back and fixed the issues that they created when they changed how jump packs and fly affects charges, and they also addressed some of the changes that have happened in different armies. So first, I want to go over some of these different changes, then I want to talk about how where I think that they fit, and who were winners and who were losers, and the general stuff that you get from these FAQs things. So first off, I'll go on the personal changes, the things that really affected my armies. The first one was the Genestealer cult. They changed Mental Onslaught so that if your opponent rolls a 6 on their dice roll, they can end the thing regardless of what the difference is. So they can either tie your score, beat your score, or roll a 6, and all three of those things will stop the cascading effect of Mental Onslaught. I'm okay with this change. I knew that something had to change because there was a lot of people that were very upset with how Mental Onslaught happened, how Mental Onslaught worked, and because in the few cases when it actually worked very, very well, it could be disastrous. All the fear mongering of it's an instant kill, and it would instantly kill a knight, and it's like, yeah, there were certain situations that you could get it so it would instantly kill a knight, but you would have to devote so much to the build of that list and that army to make that happen, and hope that you could pass a psychic test that wasn't going to get denied by like a 32-point Primaris Psyker or whatever it is. It wouldn't be an effective strategy to try to win games, is what it comes down to. If you put all of your eggs in the Mental Onslaught basket, you were probably going to lose more games than you won, because most of the time, like for me, my Mental Onslaught against worked both very well during my games and then very poorly. So against the Knight player, for instance, I put 4 wounds onto his Knight before he managed to break out of it, and then against the Space Wolves player, Wes, I managed to kill his Space Wolf flyer. So, these things happened. It would be hot and cold, but there's nothing that you could really base an entire army or an entire game upon that it would be so dramatically broken that you had to have that kind of thing work. So, knowing that something had to happen because there were too many people that were very upset about it, the way they went about changing it, I feel was the best way to go about it. Because it still gives us the ability to handle things like knights and multiple knight armies. It also still gives us the ability to handle flyers, but it gives the opponent the chance to try to break it. Because there were times when we were rolling when I would make my roll and my opponent there was nothing they could roll to beat it, so we would just go on. So we would either take a feel no pain, or we would just take the wound. And that's kind of demoralizing, and it's not fun. I wouldn't want to do that in a fun game, honestly. At a tournament, you're trying to win, and your opponent's going to be doing the exact same thing to you. None of my opponents apologized for having AP minus 2 weapons that meant that I never got a save when they shot me. So I'm not gonna, you don't apologize for having Mental Onslaught going off on them, because it's a tournament. That's what you're doing there. But I think that the change that they made, giving the opponent the ability to have a chance to stop it at every single wound, was a positive change. And it didn't nerf it to the point that it's not still effective. I really think that having the ability to try to take down flyers with Mental Onslaught, I think the ability to try to take down knights with Mental Onslaught is good. It's strong. It helps balance out weaknesses in the Genestealer cult army that aren't addressed in any other way. So it allows Mental Onslaught gives us the ability to handle flyers where nothing else in that codex does. It helps us to handle multiple knights lists that we struggle with something about on that level of just DACA output and strength and toughness, that we get one good punch in really with our units, and you can take down a knight pretty easily, but multiple knights become hard to maneuver and try to handle at the same time, because you kill one and then the next knight's just going to take you down with the Gatling cannon. So I'm happy with the change that they made there. I knew they had to make a change, and if they were going to make a change, I'd prefer them to make that a 6 for my opponent stops it, as opposed to me having a limit to how many wounds it could put out. If they had changed it to the 6, I think it really would have hampered Genestealer Cult's competitiveness too much, to be honest. And I think the way they did it still leaves us competitive and doesn't affect us as much as it would have. So I'm happy with that change. I think it was, if they were going to make a change, I mean, obviously you want to have it where you don't have that possibility, but if they're going to make a change, I'm happy with that change, and I'm happy the way they went with it. I think it's going to be it'll work out well in the end. The other change they made was they stopped allowing company commanders and Tempestor Primes from being able to give orders to Brood Brothers with the keyword Genestealer Cult. So any of the Brood Brother units that you take from the Genestealer Cult Codex are no longer allowed to receive orders. It also changed it so that other units that weren't able to receive it restricted the orders that were being able to be given back to what they are in the Astra Militarum Codex, which I kind of agreed with. That's the way I read it anyway. When they had the first FAQ that came out, was that you were still restricted to what they could give. So like they said, Ogryn weren't allowed to get orders after the first FAQ. And that made sense to me, because it's like, if you couldn't get orders when they're in the Astra Militarum, they're not going to get orders again when they're in the Genestealer Cult. Just because they all became Brood Brothers, it didn't wipe away those things. So the same thing, I always thought that Tempestor Prime could still only give orders to the Tempestus Scions and stuff like that. And the same thing with tank commanders, can only give an order to tanks. But now, the change that they made, not just clarifying that, they also clarified it now that, or they made it now so that you can't give orders to Genestealer Cult Brood Brothers, which is a big difference. My opponent that I faced in the last round, Tony, he had giant blobs of Brood Brothers, 20-man squad of Brood Brothers that he brought in with a Tempestor Prime and a company commander to give them orders. He also was giving them orders to the mortar teams. And it was super effective against me, and I'm sure it was super effective against a lot of his other opponents. And that was a big chunk of the strategy of his army, and all of a sudden it's gone. You know, he can't do that anymore. So, I mean, we've already been talking about new lists he has going forward, and they're going to be super strong and scary enough as it is. So I'm sure he's not going to be hurting too much from it, but it does require a complete change of track there for his army because of that change. So I think that change is going to affect a lot of characters. It's going to affect a lot of players, not just. It's going to affect a lot of players. I really think so, and I think it's going to be. I think it'll be fine though. Everyone will figure out what they've got to do and go forward with that. But it is going to affect people, and I think that to try to think that it won't is naive. I think it's going to be a fine change. I don't think it makes Genestealer Cult non-competitive. You know, it wasn't the only build that was competitive. I didn't have that. I had Brood Brothers, but I wasn't dependent upon Astra Militarum orders with them. I still think Brood Brothers are going to be effective as board controllers, as objective controllers, as real estate agents, and holding places. So I don't see them. I don't think Brood Brothers got nerfed out of existence. I don't think that Genestealer Cult got nerfed out of existence. It just is going to require a change because, you know, I think it makes logical sense. I can see where they were going with it to a point, but I feel like a better change would have been just requiring that you still had to follow the same rules, so that, you know, Tempestor Prime couldn't order a regular Brood Brothers squad, which is like an infantry squad, but that company commanders could, because it made sense that, you know, the Brood Brothers are supposed to represent those same units that are being represented by Astra Militarum. They just have a different keyword involved with them. So I don't know. It is what it is. I don't think it doesn't affect my armies at all, but I think it does affect Genestealer Cult. So it's interesting to see them make that kind of change. And the third thing they did was they stopped allowing you to take basically the same data slate from different books multiple times. So, you know, you can no longer take 3 heavy weapons squads from Genestealer Cult Brood Brothers and 3 heavy weapon squads from Astra Militarum Brood Brothers, and, you know, and throw out 18, or what is it, 369? Yeah, 18 mortar teams, or the same thing with Demon Princes that affected them, where you can't have 3, you know, Nurgle Demon Princes, 3 Chaos Space Marine Demon Princes, and 3 Codex Demon Princes. So now you have to have 3 Demon Princes from whatever one you want, and they have to account for that. I like that. I think it's good. I think it it's as intended. You know, they wanted to cut down on spam, and that does that. You know, it makes it so that there's not just a few armies that have these closely related but slightly different codexes that allow them to get past that rule, because it's a rule that they wanted to do, and it's a rule that was obviously how it was meant to be. So I think that kind of clarification is positive, and I think it'll be good for the game going forward. So again, I think it's a good change. I think it's a change that affects it does affect a lot of people. You know, there were people out there that were running a lot of Demon Princes. They're strong, they're effective, they can't be targeted if you've got a bunch of Zangors or a bunch of Nurglings out in front of them, because they're characters and under 10 wounds. And once they get into combat, they're just brutal, and they're psychers. You know, they're really good units. So if you could take a ton of them, people were, you know, so now they can't anymore. Another big change was the increase in price to the Castellan robots. I've got a Castellan robot. I like him a lot, but to be fair, I think that he's super effective. And I think for the 100 points more that they're charging with him now, because they increased the price of his weapons, that he's probably appropriately pointed. You know, I think that extra 100 points puts him at what he should. Are you going to see, like, there was a list that was at Barnyard that had 2 of them. You're probably not going to see that list going forward. You know, it was super effective. It was good, and it is a strong unit. But now I don't think people are going to be taking them as auto includes anymore. I think knight heavy lists are probably going to include more Crusaders, because they didn't have an increased price, and they're super effective. They put out a lot of DACA. The Gatling cannon really helps against hordes. The thermal cannon really helps against other super heavies. So it's a really good middle ground unit that is way cheaper now than the Castellan, and can still do a lot of work. And the fact that they changed rotate ion shields to a 4+ maximum means you no longer are having a 3+ invul save on that Castellan, which means he's probably not going to be around quite as often as you had when you had the 3+ invul save that you could put onto it. So the fact that they kept it at 4+ means that you can't put all of your eggs in that one basket anymore and reliably expect that basket to be around. You know, so if you can't put all those eggs in one basket, or if it becomes more dangerous to put all those eggs in one basket, people are not going to be doing it. So they'd rather put, you know, as opposed to spending, what is it going to be, like 700 points now on a Castellan, they're going to have 2 Crusaders for 300 points more, and you've got, you know, a heck of a lot more wounds, and it's going to take a lot more shots to take them down at that point, and they can spread out and do whatever they're going to do. So I think that it's going to change knight lists. I think it's going to change the kind of imperial list that you're going to see with them. But I think those changes are going to bring a lot of diversity to knight lists, which is exciting, and which is I think exactly what GW want to do. Is they still want to see Castellans, and I think for 100 points more you will still see Castellans, but at the same time you won't see everyone bringing Castellans, which is what they don't want to see. They don't want to see one list ad nauseum at any of these tournaments, and you're not going to see that anymore. Another big change that they made is the charge rule that they changed, how fly interacts during charge. So they initially changed it so that fly was no longer valid during the charge phase. It was only during the movement phase. And that really put a hard hammer to a lot of fly assault armies, so such as the Custode Bikes or the Blood Angels with their Smash Captain or Death Company or Sanguinary Guard. A lot of those guys took a big, hard knock to the nose when they weren't allowed to use their fly abilities anymore during the charge phase. The initial reason they changed it was because people were abusing how it worked, and they were just taking they were dropping down on the top of a building and making a 0-inch charge, like dropping the elbow off the top ropes. And as you know, funny it is to think about that makes it very difficult. It's not obviously the intention of the rule as how it should be used. So in order for them to take that, they decided, all right, well then you can't use fly during the charge phase. But that did mean now that they've got this giant jump back on their back, and they're just running into combat as opposed to being able to leap over that one guardsman so they could, you know, power fist the enemy tank behind him, or the enemy the enemy warlord behind him. And that's, again, I don't think what they intended for it to happen. So this FAQ, they found that happy medium, which means that you no longer ignore terrain when you're charging, but you can ignore models that aren't buildings when you're charging. So you can't just ignore that bastion and like charge over it for zero change in your charge distance. But you can now jump over that guardsman screen to punch his company commander in the face with your smash captain. Or that knight is no longer safe behind that ring of guardsmen. He can jump over it with his thunderhammer and just smack him in the face. So I think this change that they made is well reasoned and it's going to be super good for the meta and super good for the game. I think that jump pack people should be able to get at the key characters, at the targets that they want to in the charge, and this is going to allow them to do it without allowing them to just completely break the game by jumping down 0-inch charge from the top floor of a building, because they drop in deep striking 9 inches away because it still counts actual distance down, but their charge distance doesn't include vertical distance, so it's a 0-inch charge down. That's not what it was intended. That's not what they wanted to do, and now they won't have that happening. But at the same time, the jump packs still have that edge that you're paying for when you're buying a jump pack to be able to leap over these screens and get to the squishy, juicy, gooey center that you want to punch with a thunderhammer. So I'm very happy with that change. I think there's a lot of people that are very happy with that change. And the reactions that I've been seeing around the internet seem to be pretty positive. There's a lot of people that are doom and gloom. That happens literally anytime any change happens. You see people on the Gene Stealer cult that is like, well, Gene Stealer cult are garbage now. It's like, they're not. They're definitely not garbage. I think that after this last weekend, I feel very strong about how my Gene Stealer cult performed, and I feel like that these changes that were made are not going to hamper their ability to perform at a high level going forward. It's going to require me to I don't think it's going to change any of my tactics with it, because the change to Mental Onslaught doesn't make it garbage. It doesn't make it unreliable. It's just as reliable as it was before, which is not very. It's never been a super reliable weapon that you can use. It was something that could be effective. It was something that did certain things that you needed it to, and it's not something to base an entire force off of, an entire army strategy off of. And this change to it doesn't change that. This change to it, in fact, just emphasizes that it's not the end-all be-all of your strategy. It should be a tool that you can use to make it effective, like any other psychic power that's out there. To be honest, if you're trying to take down a knight, casting Might from Beyond onto your 20-man acolyte squad with rock saws is going to be way more effective in taking down a Castellan than trying to psychically drill him out, the Princeps out of the knight itself. So, we have other powers that are super effective and super strong that allow us to do a lot more, and we still have access to those. Those didn't get changed. I think Mental Onslaught had to be changed because it was causing too many bad feelings. I don't think it was broken. Despite what anyone says. I know there's going to be a ton of you saying, no, that power was obviously super broken because one time it killed a knight. At the same time, Might from Beyond allowed me to take down a Knight Castellan in one round of combat with 5 acolytes with rock saws. You're talking about 7-point units with 10-point weapon upgrades that were able to take down a Knight Castellan in one round of combat. I didn't even have to get to the rending clause on the rest of the squad. It was literally those 5 guys took down a Knight Castellan at Warzone Gigabytes because of Might from Beyond, which is another psychic power that we have. So, is that now broken because I was able to kill a knight with the one psychic power? Maybe, Or what about being able to use mind control to take over a Knight Castellan to be able to shoot his other knight friends with a volcano lance? Is that broken? It's effective, it's strong, but I think that any of these powers that you have out there are super strong and effective, and that's what they're meant to be, because what's the point of having a garbage psychic power that does nothing for you? There are plenty of powers out there that do nothing for people, and they just end up sitting in their card deck not getting used. So I think that the powers that are there are strong. There's a lot of powers that a lot of people have. being able, a null zone to be able to take away an invul save really affects a lot of models, a lot of armies. So psychic powers are always one of those things that are super strong, and people who don't have access to it are obviously going to feel bitter about it. But at the same time, I think the armies are getting balanced out so that there's, you may not have access to that, but you'll have access to other things that will help you. There's another big change was that bringing in the assassins now costs 2 CP as opposed to 1 CP. I think that was a good change. There were a lot of people with assassins at the tournament, because for 1 CP, it's a no-brainer. You leave 85 points off your list, and you bring in an assassin that's going to do the exact job that you need it to for 85 points and 1 CP. Now for 2 CP, maybe you think about it, because a lot of those, a lot of the Imperium lists don't have a gajillion CP, and especially now that they're balancing things out and they're trying to change how certain powers work, you're going to need those CP for other things, so you might think twice about bringing in an assassin for those 2 CP. So maybe you have 85 points off your list, and you get into certain situations of games where you're like, you know what, none of these assassins are really going to be doing much for me. I'd rather keep those 2 CP in order to, rotate ion shields on my Crusader, or use it to be able to put up another power. So I think that the change there is a positive change. I think it still makes assassins effective and do what they want to do, but now adds a little bit of extra cost to it to make you figure out what you're going to do. So I like that balance change there as well. Honestly, there was no change in the FAQs really that I saw that I was very unhappy about. I mean, the changes, they made a couple changes to Grey Knights that it seemed like an odd choice to target them with any kind of nerfs. I don't think that many people were having really bad issues with Grey Knights out there as it was, that they really needed any attention. The changes they made they're okay. I don't think that they are groundbreaking, but I mean, the fact that they affected them at all is a little bit questionable. I'm not sure why they drew the ire of the GW rules team, but they did. And I don't think Grey Knights were really in a position that it's going to affect their viability at all, because I don't think they were super viable competitively anyway. But now these changes, I don't think are that drastically effective to them that it really changes that kind of dynamic at all. It seemed a weird choice to target them with that. So let's talk about some of the winners and losers in this. I think the change to orcs not being able to mob up ludas really was not it's troubling to them. That was a super strong effective strategy, but I've talked to a lot of orc players that said it seemed overkill a lot of times to have 25 ludas, because it became a big target that everyone just dumped all of their attacks into, that they would eventually just take them out, and while they could just put out a metric crap ton of shots and take down a lot of things, it became another one of those situations where a lot of your eggs are in one basket, and if that basket falls apart, you're in trouble. And it also, I think that it ran a little counter to what they had intended for the rule. So I think the change was to really reel it back into what they imagined, which was creating large groups of boys, and to try to save some of those squads of boys that got narrowed down, that got saved from running off from morale because of the fact that they could use that unit next to them's leadership, and now you could just consume them into it. So it's the same idea where it's like their leadership saved them, and then they just join them because of following the leadership up the chain. So that makes sense the way it works with the boys. I think it does affect them because it does change again, sort of like the Brood Brothers thing for the Gene Stealer cult, where it does affect certain builds of an army. I don't think it changes the viability of the army. I still think orcs are going to be strong, and you're going to see them really wreck a lot of face. They still do. They're pretty strong. It just takes a lot of bodies and a lot of models to play them. That timing becomes difficult, and that's why I don't think you see them or the Gene Stealer cult really just like super high up there on a lot of these GTs and competitive scenes is because Horde armies are tough to play. They are mentally draining. They are hard to just physically play with that many models for 6 games over the course of a weekend, that by the end of it, you're eventually going to be just exhausted and make mistakes with that many armies. So, honestly, when it comes down to it, what ends up happening is that that's why they suffer a bit in the competitive scene. The armies themselves are very strong. So if you're playing one-off games, orcs are going to do are going to be super effective and super competitive. Same thing with Genestealer cults. But once you start getting into multi-game tournaments and things like that, you end up with a situation that just becomes difficult to handle. Honestly. So, I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Sorry, my battery was dying on me there. So I don't think orcs are really. I don't think they won. I don't think they lost. They took a hit, but I don't think that they're really out of the competitive scene. I don't think they took such a hard hit that it's going to be hard for them to recover. I think you're going to find people finding new, cool, awesome builds that'll work for them. So along those same lines, looking at some of the other armies, I think Tau did pretty well. I think the fact that there wasn't many changes to them and they were already pretty competitive in things that were going on means that in the balancing issues, because I think that they did pretty well, because staying still while others came down really makes it strong and effective. I think Knights took a hit, obviously, because of the Castellan and the Rotate Ion Shields. Between the two of them, I think you're going to see people are going to have to start thinking about what they do, because it just became a point where you had your Castellan centerpiece that was a 3-up invul save, and it was just going to stick around and start shooting DACA for the whole game. And people had to respond to that. So you couldn't bring a bunch of vehicles, you couldn't bring a bunch of things that were just going to get blown off the board each turn by the power of the Castellan. And even if you had a whole bunch of firepower that you're throwing back at it, his 3-up invul save was eventually usually going to be enough to hold off for the game. So thinking about that, I think that going forward, you're going to see a lot of armies that are doing. I think that you're going to see people rethinking how they're going to use their knight armies. I still think they're viable. I still think they could be super competitive. I think you're going to see a lot more Crusaders than you are going to see, and you're going to see probably less Castellans and more Crusaders, to be honest, just the way it works out that way. And because of that, I think you're going to see people bringing in a lot more vehicles. So suddenly now having a couple Predator tanks is an effect. You can do it now, because the Crusaders are not as they can still kill a Predator tank, easy enough, but they're not as insta-killing as the Castellan was at killing those vehicles. So you can bring them in and have them be effective anti-knight forces again on the table. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes. I've already been talking to people who are considering bringing back vehicles, tough 7, tough 8 vehicles to do the jobs that they were doing before the Castellan made it very difficult to really bring that into a competitive meta scene. So I think Knights took a hit. Genestealer Cult took a hit, but I don't think that they're out of it. I don't think that they're uncompetitive. Obviously, if you don't have any changes, it's better than having changes for the negative. But at the same time, our Aberrants are still super strong. Our Acolytes are still super strong. We still have some of the greatest psychic powers in the game right now. And I think that they're going to still be a force to be reckoned with. And I'm excited to explore them myself going forward. It'll be interesting to see where it expands going forward with other people too. I think Eldar took a bit of a hit. They changed the way the Eldar powers work so that the Eldari psychic powers no longer affect other Eldar units. So, for instance, Doom, it doesn't affect if you are bringing like a mixed Eldar force. So you've got Ynnari, or you just have a detachment of Dark Eldar and a detachment of Craftworld Eldar. The Dark Eldar can no longer benefit from the Doom or the Jinx powers that you cast on someone else. It has to be an Eldari unit that benefits from it. I mean, it still means that that the Dark Reapers are going to be able to reroll their wounds against you, but now you don't have Ravagers rerolling their wounds against you because of Doom. The biggest loser in all of that, I think, is going to be Ynnari. That paired with the changes to how Soul Burst is going to work, I think is going to knock them down a peg, and I think it's going to be territory that they're not very used to getting knocked down a peg, but I think it's going to be territory that's going to be I think beneficial for the game. I think going forward they're going to be a bit more balanced, and people will still take them. I guarantee you people will still take them because the combinations that you can create within all of that is still going to be super strong. But at the same time, I think you'll probably see a lot more mono codex pointy ears. I think you're going to see a lot more Craft World only. I think you're going to see a lot more Dark Eldar only than you're going to see Ynnari because of the changes they make. Because at the end of the day, it's like Ynnari can still be taken, but you could probably do something stronger by going mono Craft World or mono Dark Eldar, something along those lines. And I think you're going to see people making those changes because of that. Because at that point, once you get up into the competitive meta, into the tournament scene, people are going to choose the easiest and best option that they have available to them, because that's what you should do. It's like if everyone else is playing baseball with an aluminum bat, why are you going to play with a wooden bat? There's no reason to. Yeah, you can still hit a home run with that wooden bat, but you're going to be easier to hit a home run with that aluminum bat. And if everyone else is playing with aluminum bats and you're playing with a wooden bat, you can still do well. You can still have a good time, and you can still play baseball, but you're not going to have as many home runs on average as people who bring those aluminum bats. So a lot of the top players, a lot of the competitive players, a lot of the tournament players are going to be bringing those aluminum bats of probably Craft World exclusive armies versus the Ynnari army because of the change that Soul Burst had to them. So, and that's kind of my opinion on all of this. It's. I felt they were well reasoned. I felt that they were well balanced, and I felt that the changes that were made, in most situations, sorry, Grey Knights, were called for and were things that the scene and the community wanted to see happen. I know a lot of people were complaining that they didn't change how Soup works, but I think that 8th edition started out with them wanting to allow you to play Soup, because you look at a lot of these things, you look at all of the books, you look at all the fluff, even if you look at the fluff within the codexes themselves, these armies of the Imperium, the armies of the Chaos, they aren't fighting alone, they're very rarely out on their own doing their own thing. The Space Marines are almost always supported by Imperial Guard. The Titans are almost always supported by Imperial Guard and Space Marines. All of them are. That's how it was meant to be, and I think that you're not going to see them change that because it doesn't do any good for the game or GW to make it mono codex, because at that point you're putting restrictions on it that aren't fluffy. So all these people complaining that it's whack players ruining the game through Soup. Soup is the most fluffy way to play Imperial armies. Plain and simple. And if you don't want to play it because you have a thing in your mind that you want to play mono codex, that's what I had when I was doing my Dark Angels, that's fine. You can totally do it. You don't have to take it if you don't want to. But understand that just because someone takes Imperial Guard with their Space Marines or Imperial Guard with their Knights, it doesn't mean they're being unfluffy. It doesn't mean that they're being a whack player. In fact, they're probably being more fluffy than someone who only brings Imperial Knights. Imperial Knights very rarely show up on the battlefield by themselves. They almost always have the support of a PDF, or an Imperial Guard unit or Space Marines with them, because that's how they operate. That's how they work. And to complain about Soup ruining the game is disingenuous to me. It doesn't ruin the game. I don't think it affects the game at all. I think what it does is it opens up the opportunities and the variety that you can bring. Yeah, a lot of people end up bringing the Loyal 32 or the Rusty 17 or whatever other iteration of a cheap battalion that you can think of. But so what? And if you don't want to see that, you don't have to play it. If you go to a tournament, though, understand that you're going to a situation where people are trying to win. That's what they're there for. And if people are playing to win, that's what you should expect. you know? So to complain that they didn't do anything about soup, it doesn't affect your game that you play. It doesn't affect the game that anyone else plays. All it would affect would be tournament situations. And a tournament situation is where people go to try to win at this game. And if you don't want to do it, that's fine. You're allowed to do whatever you want. I played many, many games with my Dark Angels that I kept at Mono Codex because I want to just do Dark Angels. Look at my Genestealer cult. I don't have Astra Militarum allied in. I don't have Tyranids allied in. I'm just using Genestealer cult because I want to. It doesn't make me a better player. It doesn't make me a morally superior player. That's my personal preference. And if your personal preference is that you want to keep it Mono Codex, bully for you. Do it. Seriously, do it. That's what I do. I enjoy it. I can imagine that a lot of other people enjoy it. But do I begrudge other people allying in Tyranids to their Genestealer cult? Not in the slightest. Do I begrudge other people allying in Imperial Knights to their Imperial Guard? No. Do I begrudge other people allying in Chaos Space Marines with their demons? Absolutely not. If that's what you want to do, do it. And I think that the game is benefited by having those different options as opposed to trying to, restrict people to using one codex. Because at the end of the day, it's a game and it's meant to be played and enjoyed. And if you start restricting how people play and enjoy that game, you really restrict a lot of what makes this game unique. Because if you want it restricted, play chess. You have zero choice in your chess codex as to what units you bring, and you can play it and it's completely balanced. There's no issues of balance there because you both have the same models. You both have the same rules for each of those models and they can play it out. And it's a very strategic game. It's one of the most strategic games in the history of man, and you can play it and you could get very good at it and you can play against other people that are very good at it and have a lot of fun if that's what you want to do. But at the end of the day, what makes Warhammer such a unique and awesome thing is the variety that you can bring to the table. The fact that you can bring 200 orc boys to the table, the fact that you can bring, a Knight Titan, that you can bring a tank force across, or demons, or Chaos Space Marines. The fact that not every single Chaos Space Marine Chaos list is the same. The fact that not every Imperium list is the same. The fact that we have the ability to change things up so that if I want to bring an assassin, I can bring an assassin. If I want to bring some guard, I can bring a guard. If I want to bring a tank, I'll bring a tank. If I want to bring a knight, I'll bring a knight. It opens up the possibilities, and the more options and the more possibilities that you have out there, honestly, for me, the better the game gets. And if you don't want to play it, you don't have to play it, because odds are, if you have an issue with it, you're not really looking at this game from a competitive standpoint. So if you're not at the tournament and you're just playing with someone at the game store or playing with a friend in your basement or your garage, then you agree not to do those the loyal 32. Just don't do it. Make rules yourself. If you want to create it so that you're restricting how CP get used, you're absolutely free to do that. And GW has supported you doing that from the very beginning, especially with 8th edition. That's why they had it, and they explicitly put it out there that there is open play, narrative play, and match play, and there's no reason that you can't combine the two, that you can't play a match play mission with open play rules, or that you can't play a match play, a narrative mission with match play rules. And there's no reason that you can't change things if you agree to it. So if you and your opponent agree that you don't want to be able to use the CP from different detachments across the army, then agree to it and play it that way if you want to in your basement or at the local gaming store. But at the end of the day, you can't expect GW to change the game to suit what you just want to do in your game, because having that variety, having the options like that really helps the game. And you can say, yeah, it helps to sell units, but that's because I want to. I want them to sell more units. I want GW to do super, super well. And I want to be able to buy those units, I don't want to have to... I don't want the only time that I can use a knight is in a purely knight army. That's no fun to me. I'd rather just have one knight that I can bring to the table and just be like, this guy's super cool, let's have some fun, Or if I've got my Genestealer cult, I can then buy a small force of Tyranids to ally them in. Why do you think I've got the small force of Blood Angels? I only have them because I'm able to bring them in with my Dark Angels or my other Imperial forces that I can play them with them, it allows me to build my army from there and increase my army from there because of the ability for me to have those kind of allies. So a lot of the things that they didn't address in the FAQ, I think were deliberate, and they should have been deliberate. And I'm happy that they didn't address them, because I think that trying to address them would have drastically hurt the game. So that's the final say of what I think about this, is that I think it was a very positive FAQ. I think they addressed a lot of things that needed to be addressed. I think they readdressed a lot of things that needed to be addressed. There were certain things that changed. Like, I don't know if Grey Knights really needed to lose, had to have the changes that they did. I'm not so sure if Death Watch needed to lose the use of special issue ammunition with the bolter rule, the bolter discipline rule. At the end of the day, they made the calls that they did. They made the changes they did because they saw something that they didn't want to see. And it's, at the end of the day, it's their game. They can make whatever rules changes they want. I don't think the Death Watch and I don't think the Grey Knights needed to, but they did. And I think that at the end of the day, the changes that they made are predominantly positive, and that it seems this new FAQ seemed way more reasonable and responsive than some of the other ones that I felt. There were some changes that happened that were kind of knee-jerk, and that's why you saw them changing back and forth. I think that these changes were well-reasoned, well thought out, and effective at doing what they wanted to do. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and keep this conversation going, because I want to hear. I want to hear what you guys think about this, and think what you guys think. What do you think? What do you think the best change was in the FAQ? The most positive change was that you were happy to see them make, and what change do you think that they didn't need to make that you thought that they made? So keep going the conversation down below. And again, I want to thank you all for supporting me and sticking with me even through spamming your your YouTube feeds with the videos. I ended up deleting the videos, so because there was like a dozen 5-minute videos, and it was nothing much to really be gained from that. So again, I apologize for that, but I'm thanking all of you that are still subscribers for sticking with me, and any of you that I did lose, you can join back in. I took away those videos, and I hope you guys come back and resubscribe and join back in on with the Woo Crew for all this. And speaking of the Woo Crew, thank you to all my Patreons out there. You guys really help support me. I know there's been a few more people that have been joining on with it, and I really appreciate and really enjoy the support that you guys give me. It really helps me make this and keep this going. So thank you very, very much to all of you that do that. And any of you who want to support the channel, take a look at the Patreon page. There's a link in the description, or take a look at my merch store. Buy yourself a t-shirt. I have a t-shirt that says I spend CP to reroll ones into ones. And I probably should have been wearing it this weekend. I did that plenty of times this weekend. So check it out there. There's a lot of cool t-shirt designs in there that you can check out. So again, thank you everybody for all the support, and thank you for watching. And I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. I certainly have. I have been Phil, the Glacial Geek, as always. And until next time, have fun.